The fluorescent lights of St. Mary's Hospital burned my eyes as I slowly regained consciousness. The steady beeping of monitors filled the sterile air, and the antiseptic smell made my stomach turn. My head throbbed with each heartbeat, and when I tried to move, sharp pain shot through my ribs. "She's awake," I heard a nurse whisper to someone. Through my blurred vision, I could make out the figure of my husband, Robert, standing near the foot of my bed. His arms were crossed, and even in my groggy state, I could feel the tension radiating from him. We'd been married for 8 years, but lately our relationship had been hanging by a thread. Money problems, his drinking, and constant arguments had turned our home into a battlefield. "How are you feeling, Mrs. Williams?" Dr. Peterson asked, checking my chart. She was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a neat bun. "Like I got hit by a truck," I managed to croak, my throat dry and scratchy. "Well, technically it was a delivery van that ran the red light," she said with a gentle smile. "You've been unconscious for 2 days. You have 3 broken ribs, a concussion, and significant bruising, but you're going to be okay." Robert hadn't said a word. He just stood there, staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Anger? Disappointment? I'd seen that look too many times before. "The police want to speak with you when you're feeling up to it," Dr. Peterson continued. "The driver who hit you was texting while driving. He's facing serious charges." As she spoke, I noticed Robert's jaw tighten. He'd been increasingly frustrated with our financial situation. His construction job barely covered our mortgage, and my part-time work at the local library was enough to make ends meet. We'd been fighting about money constantly, and I knew he blamed me for not contributing more. "I need to step out and make some calls," Dr. Peterson said. "I'll be back to check on you in a bit." The moment she left, the atmosphere in the room shifted. Robert moved closer to my bed, his footsteps heavy on the polished floor. Outside the window, I could see the busy street below, people going about their normal lives while mine hung in the balance. "So," Robert said, his voice cold and detached, "here we are again. Another hospital bill we can't afford." "Robert, No, don't." He held up his hand. "Don't give me excuses. First, it was your back surgery last year, now this. Do you know how much this is going to cost us? How far behind we're going to be?" My heart sank. Even here, even now, it was about money. "I didn't choose to get hit by a car, Robert. Didn't you?" His voice was rising now, and I could smell the alcohol on his breath. He'd been drinking again. "Maybe if you'd been paying attention instead of daydreaming like you always do." "That's not fair, and you know it." "Fair." Robert laughed bitterly. "You want to talk about fair? Fair would be having a wife who actually contributes to this marriage instead of draining our bank account with medical bills." The machines around me continued their steady rhythm, but my heart was racing. This wasn't the man I'd married. That Robert had been kind, supportive, full of dreams about our future together. This version was angry, bitter, and seemed to blame me for everything that had gone wrong in our lives. "The insurance will cover most of it," I said weakly. "Most of it isn't good enough, Jessica. We're already 3 months behind on the mortgage. My boss is talking about layoffs. We can't keep doing this." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of his words. Our marriage had been struggling for months, maybe even years. What started as small disagreements had grown into major resentments. Robert felt like he was carrying all the financial burden, while I felt unappreciated and unloved. "I'm going to try harder," I whispered. "When I get out of here, I'll look for a full-time job. We can work through this." "Can we?" Robert's voice was sharp. "Because I'm not sure we can anymore, Jessica. I'm not sure I want to." The room fell silent except for the medical equipment. Outside, dark clouds were gathering, and the October wind rattled the windows. Chicago in autumn could be beautiful, but today it felt cold and unwelcoming. A knock on the door interrupted our tense conversation. Dr. Peterson returned, followed by a distinguished-looking man in an expensive suit. He appeared to be in his 60s, with silver hair and a briefcase in his hand. "Mrs. Williams," Dr. Peterson said, "this is Mr. Harrison. He's an attorney, and he needs to speak with you about something urgent." Robert straightened up, his expression shifting from anger to confusion. "What's this about?" Mr. Harrison cleared his throat and opened his briefcase. "Mrs. Williams, I represent the estate of Margaret Thompson. She passed away 3 days ago." I frowned, trying to place the name through my medication-induced fog. I don't understand. Who is Margaret Thompson?" "She was your great-aunt on your mother's side. According to our records, you were her only living relative. My mother had died when I was 12, and I'd lost touch with most of her family. I vaguely remembered hearing about a wealthy aunt who lived somewhere in the suburbs, but we'd never met." "I still don't understand why you're here," I said. Mr. Harrison pulled out a thick document. "Mrs. Williams, your great-aunt has left her entire estate to you. This includes her home in Lake Forest, her investment portfolio, and approximately $2.8 million in various accounts." The room went completely silent. Even the machines seemed to pause. I stared at the lawyer, certain I'd misheard due to my head injury. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" "You've inherited $2.8 million, along with a substantial property and other assets." Robert's face had gone completely white. He gripped the bed rail so hard his knuckles were turning the same color. The man who had just been berating me for our financial problems was staring at the lawyer like he'd spoken in a foreign language. "There must be some mistake," I stammered. "No mistake. I have all the documentation right here. Margaret Thompson specifically named Jessica Marie Williams of 1247 Elm Street, Chicago, Illinois as her sole beneficiary." The irony wasn't lost on me. Seconds ago, Robert had been telling me how much of a financial burden I was. Now, suddenly I was worth more money than either of us had ever dreamed of. "Jessica," Robert said, his voice suddenly gentle, almost pleading. "This is incredible news. We're saved." I looked at him, this man who had just wished I would disappear from his life, now looking at me like I was his salvation. The machines continued their steady beeping, marking time in a world that had just completely shifted. Mr. Harrison continued explaining the legal process, but I found it hard to focus. My head was still pounding, and the emotional whiplash from Robert's cruel words to this unexpected windfall was overwhelming. "We'll need to meet once you're released from the hospital to go over all the details," Mr. Harrison was saying. "There are some properties to inspect, accounts to transfer, and legal documents to sign." As he spoke, I watched Robert's expression change from shock to something else entirely. His eyes had taken on a calculating look that made my stomach turn. This was the same man who had just told me he wasn't sure he wanted to be married anymore. After Mr. Harrison left, Robert immediately moved to the chair beside my bed, reaching for my hand with a tenderness I hadn't felt from him in months. "Jessica, honey, this changes everything," he said, his voice warm and caring. "We can pay off all our debts, buy a new house, maybe take that trip to Europe you always wanted." I pulled my hand away. 10 minutes ago, you were telling me you weren't sure you wanted to be married anymore. I was upset, stressed about money. You know how I get when I'm worried about our future. Our future. I met his eyes directly. Or your future. Robert's jaw tightened slightly, but he maintained his suddenly sweet demeanor. "Baby, we're a team. We always have been. This inheritance is going to give us the fresh start we need." The rain had started outside, pattering against the window in a steady rhythm. I watched the droplets race down the glass, thinking about how dramatically my life had changed in the span of a few minutes. Not just because of the money, but because of what Robert's reaction had revealed about his true character. "I need to rest," I said finally. "This is all too much to process right now." Of course. I'll stay right here with you." But I could see it in his eyes, the same look he got when he was planning something. Robert was already spending my inheritance in his mind, already figuring out how this windfall could benefit him. As I closed my eyes and tried to sleep, I couldn't shake the memory of his earlier words. I hope you never recover. Now that I was wealthy, suddenly my recovery was the most important thing in the world to him. The machines continued their steady rhythm as Chicago settled into an early autumn evening outside my window. I had no idea that this was only the beginning of a journey that would test everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and the true nature of the people closest to me. The next morning brought a parade of visitors I hadn't expected. Robert arrived early with coffee from my favorite cafe downtown, something he hadn't done in over a year, and a bouquet of roses that must have cost more than we usually spent on groceries for a week. "I thought you might be hungry," he said, unpacking containers of food. "I got you that chicken salad sandwich from Morrison's deli that you love." I accepted the food gratefully, but something felt off about his sudden attentiveness. This was the same man who had forgotten our anniversary 3 months ago and hadn't brought me flowers since our second year of marriage. Dr. Peterson arrived for her morning rounds, looking pleased with my progress. "Your vitals are looking much better today, Jessica. How are you feeling?" "Better, I think. The headache is less intense." "Good. We'll keep monitoring you for another day or two, but I think you'll be able to go home soon." As she left, I noticed Robert's expression tighten slightly at the mention of home. Our small 2-bedroom house on Elm Street suddenly seemed inadequate now that we had other options. Around noon, my best friend Caroline arrived. We'd known each other since college, and she was one of the few people who truly understood the state of my marriage. Caroline worked as a social worker for the city, and she had a keen sense for reading people's motivations. "I came as soon as I heard about the accident," she said, giving me a gentle hug. "How are you holding up?" "It's been complicated," I said, glancing at Robert, who was suddenly very interested in his phone. Caroline followed my gaze and raised an eyebrow. She'd been encouraging me to consider counseling or even separation for months, having witnessed too many of Robert's angry outbursts and passive-aggressive behavior. "I'll go get some more coffee," Robert announced, standing abruptly. "Caroline, would you like anything?" "No, thank you," she replied coolly. The moment he left the room, Caroline moved closer to my bed. "Okay, what's really going on? You look stressed, and that's saying something considering you were just in a major accident." I told her about the inheritance and Robert's dramatic shift in behavior. Caroline's expression grew more concerned with each detail. "Jessica, you need to be very careful here," she said quietly. "This is exactly the kind of situation where people show their true colors. I know Robert has his flaws, but maybe this could be a fresh start for us, maybe without the financial pressure." "Honey," Caroline interrupted gently, "people don't change overnight. If anything, sudden wealth often makes existing problems worse, not better." Before I could respond, Robert returned with his coffee, and Caroline smoothly changed the subject. But I could see the worry in her eyes. The afternoon brought another unexpected visitor. My neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, an elderly woman who lived 3 houses down from us. She'd always been kind to me, often bringing over vegetables from her garden or inviting me for tea. "I heard about your accident, dear," she said, settling into the visitor's chair. "I also heard some interesting news about your family situation." Robert perked up at this, clearly hoping for some acknowledgement of our sudden good fortune. "Your great-aunt Margaret was quite a woman," Mrs. Patterson continued. "I actually knew her, you know. We served on the hospital's charity board together for many years." This was news to me. "You knew her?" "Oh, yes. She spoke about you often. She'd been trying to find a way to connect with you for years, but she respected your privacy after your mother passed." I felt a pang of sadness. I wish I had known her. "She knew about you, though. She knew about your marriage troubles, too." The room suddenly felt very quiet. Robert set down his coffee cup with a slight clatter. "Margaret was very concerned about your situation," Mrs. Patterson continued, her eyes moving between Robert and me. She made some specific provisions in her will based on her observations. What kind of provisions? I asked. Mrs. Patterson glanced at Robert, who had gone pale again. Well, I probably shouldn't be the one to tell you. That's for the lawyers to explain. But let's just say your great-aunt was a very wise woman who wanted to make sure you were protected. After she left, Robert was unusually quiet. He claimed he needed to go home to take care of some things, but something in his manner suggested he was more rattled by Mrs. Patterson's visit than he wanted to admit. That evening, alone for the first time since waking up, I had time to really think. The pain medication made my thoughts somewhat fuzzy, but certain things were becoming clearer. Robert's sudden transformation from hostile to loving corresponded exactly with the moment he learned about the inheritance. His tender words felt rehearsed, and his gestures seemed calculated rather than genuine. Dr. Peterson stopped by during her evening rounds. "You're looking thoughtful," she observed. "Dr. Peterson, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "When someone has a head injury like mine, does it affect their judgment, their ability to make important decisions?" She sat down in the visitor's chair, giving me her full attention. "That's a very good question. Concussions can temporarily affect cognitive function, but you seem to be thinking quite clearly. Are you worried about something specific?" I hesitated, then decided to be honest. My husband, he's acting very differently since he learned about my inheritance. I'm starting to question things about our marriage that I maybe ignored before. Dr. Peterson nodded slowly. Financial windfalls can certainly put stress on relationships, sometimes in unexpected ways. Trust your instincts, Jessica. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Her words stayed with me through the night. I found myself replaying conversations with Robert from the past few months, his increasing anger, his drinking, the way he'd started staying out late without explanation, the way he'd looked at me just before the inheritance news, like I was a burden he wanted to escape. The next morning brought another visit from Mr. Harrison, this time with a thick folder of documents. "I have some additional information about your inheritance that we need to discuss," he said, settling into the chair beside my bed. Robert had arrived early again, armed with more expensive coffee and pastries, but I noticed he positioned himself where he could hear every word of the conversation. "Your great-aunt included some very specific instructions in her will," Mr. Harrison continued. "She was concerned about your welfare and wanted to ensure that you would be protected from anyone who might try to take advantage of your situation." "What does that mean exactly?" I asked. Mr. Harrison opened his folder and pulled out a document. "The inheritance is structured as a trust with you as the primary beneficiary. However, there are certain conditions." Robert leaned forward, his casual facade slipping slightly. "The first condition is that you must be legally separated or divorced before you can access the full amount. Until then, you have access to a monthly allowance of $5,000 for your personal expenses." The room went completely silent. I could hear Robert's sharp intake of breath, and when I looked at him, his face had gone from pale to red. "What?" Robert said, his voice tight. That can't be legal." "It's completely legal," Mr. Harrison replied calmly. "Margaret Thompson was very specific about her concerns regarding your marriage. She believed that Jessica deserved the opportunity to make choices about her future without financial pressure or coercion." I stared at the lawyer, trying to process what this meant. My great-aunt, whom I'd never met, had somehow known about my troubled marriage and had structured her gift to protect me from exactly the situation I was now facing. "But surely," Robert said, his voice becoming more strained, "as her husband, I have some legal right to—" "No, sir, you don't," Mr. Harrison interrupted firmly. "This is Jessica's inheritance, and the conditions are ironclad. If she chooses to remain married, she'll continue to receive the monthly allowance. If she chooses to separate or divorce, she'll have full access to the estate." Robert stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "This is ridiculous. We're married. We're supposed to be a team." "Robert," I said quietly, "please sit down." But he was pacing now, his earlier sweet demeanor completely gone. "A team, Jessica. That's what marriage is supposed to be. We share everything, good and bad." The irony wasn't lost on me. This from the man who had been ready to abandon our marriage just days before. "There's one more thing," Mr. Harrison added. "Your great-aunt also left a letter for you. She wanted you to read it when you learned about the inheritance conditions." He handed me an envelope with my name written in elegant handwriting. My hands were shaking slightly as I opened it. "My dear Jessica, if you are reading this letter, it means that I am gone and you have learned about your inheritance. I wish we could have met in person, but I respected your need for space after your mother's death. I have been quietly watching over you from a distance, and I am deeply concerned about your marriage to Robert. I have hired a private investigator to ensure your safety, and what I learned convinced me that you need protection and choices. This inheritance is not just money, my dear. It is freedom. Freedom to choose the life you want without being trapped by financial circumstances. I hope you will use it wisely. You deserve to be loved and respected. Never settle for less. Asterisk with all my love, Aunt Margaret." My hands were trembling as I finished reading. Robert had stopped pacing and was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before, something between panic and rage. "What does it say?" he demanded. I folded the letter carefully and looked at him, really looked at him. This man who had promised to love me in sickness and in health, who had instead wished I would never recover just days ago. "It says I have choices," I replied simply. The machines around me continued their steady beeping as the weight of my great-aunt's gift began to sink in. This wasn't just about money. It was about dignity, self-respect, and the chance to build a life based on love rather than financial necessity. Robert was staring at me like he'd never seen me before, and maybe he hadn't. Maybe he'd only ever seen someone to pay the bills, someone to blame for his problems, someone who would never have the means to leave. Outside the window, the October sun was breaking through the clouds, casting long shadows across the hospital room. Everything was changing, and for the first time in years, I felt like I had the power to choose the direction of that change. The question was, what was I going to do with it? The atmosphere in the room had shifted dramatically. Robert was no longer the attentive, loving husband who had brought me flowers and coffee. He was pacing like a caged animal, his face flushed with anger and disbelief. "This is insane," he muttered, running his hands through his hair. "Some woman we never even met is trying to control our marriage from beyond the grave." Mr. Harrison remained calm and professional. "Mrs. Williams, take all the time you need to consider your options. Here's my card. Call me when you're ready to discuss the next steps." After he left, Robert immediately turned to me, his eyes blazing. "You can't seriously be considering this." "Considering what?" "Don't play dumb with me, Jessica. I can see it in your face. You're actually thinking about leaving me for money." I felt a surge of anger at his accusation. "This isn't about money, Robert. This is about respect, about love, about the fact that 3 days ago you told me you hoped I'd never recover." I was upset. People say things when they're stressed. Do they? Because I've been stressed too, but I never wished you harm. Robert sat down heavily in the chair beside my bed, his demeanor shifting again. This time, instead of anger, I saw something that looked like desperation. "Jessica, baby, please. We've been together for 8 years. We've built a life together. You can't throw that all away because of one bad moment. One bad moment." I stared at him in disbelief. "Robert, you've been drinking more, staying out late, blaming me for our financial problems. When was the last time you told me you loved me without wanting something in return?" He was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him trying to formulate an answer that would sound convincing. "I show you I love you in other ways," he said finally. "Like how?" I I work hard to support us. I fix things around the house. You work to support yourself too, and you fix things because they're broken, not as a gesture of love. The conversation was interrupted by Caroline's return. She immediately picked up on the tension in the room. "Is everything okay here?" she asked, her social worker instincts clearly activated. "We're having a private conversation," Robert said tersely. "Actually," I said, "I'd like Caroline to stay." Robert's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. Caroline sat in the other visitor's chair, her presence somehow making me feel stronger and more clear-headed. "Caroline," I said, "if someone you loved was in the hospital, what would your first concern be?" "Their health and recovery, obviously." I looked at Robert. "When you first walked into this room, your first words were about hospital bills and how much this was going to cost. Not how I was feeling or if I was in pain." "That's not fair," Robert protested. "I was worried about practical things. Someone has to think about the real world." "The real world?" Caroline interjected. "Your wife was unconscious for 2 days, and your primary concern was money." "You don't understand our situation," Robert snapped at her. "We have real problems, real bills. I can't just ignore that." "But now that those problems are solved," I said quietly, "you're angry because the solution comes with conditions that don't benefit you directly." Robert opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again. For perhaps the first time in our relationship, he couldn't find words to justify his position. Over the next few hours, more visitors came and went. My supervisor from the library brought flowers and well wishes. Some neighbors stopped by. Each interaction highlighted the contrast between how others treated me with genuine concern and kindness and Robert's calculating behavior. That evening, after Caroline left and the hospital grew quiet, Robert made one more attempt to salvage the situation. "Look," he said, pulling his chair closer to my bed. "I know I haven't been the best husband lately, but this inheritance could be a fresh start for us. We could go to counseling, take a vacation, buy a nice house. I could cut back on drinking. You could do all of those things now, Robert. You don't need millions of dollars to stop drinking or treat me with respect. But the financial pressure, will there always be some excuse?" I interrupted. "Some reason why you can't be the partner I need you to be." He was quiet for a moment, then tried a different approach. "What about for better or for worse? In sickness and in health? Those were vows, Jessica. Promises we made to each other." "You're right, they were. And you broke them 3 days ago when you stood in this room and told me you hoped I'd never recover." Robert's face crumpled, and for a moment I saw a glimpse of vulnerability that reminded me why I'd fallen in love with him in the first place. But then I remembered all the times he'd used that same expression to manipulate me into forgiveness, into staying, into accepting less than I deserved. "I didn't mean it," he whispered. "I was just so angry and scared, and when you're angry and scared, you become cruel. That's the problem, Robert. I can't live my life walking on eggshells, wondering when the next explosion is coming." That night, after Robert left to go home, I lay in the darkness thinking about my great-aunt's letter. She had given me more than money. She had given me permission to value myself, to expect better, to believe that I deserved love that didn't come with conditions. The next morning brought a surprise visitor, Detective Martinez from the Chicago Police Department. She was investigating the accident and needed to get my statement about what had happened. "The driver who hit you has been charged with vehicular assault and driving while distracted," she explained. "He was texting and ran the red light at about 35 miles per hour. As she took my statement, Detective Martinez mentioned something that caught my attention. "We also had to interview your husband as part of our investigation," she said. "Standard procedure for family members." "Oh, how did that go?" Detective Martinez paused, studying my face carefully. "Mrs. Williams, has your husband shown any concerning behavior since your accident?" The question surprised me. Why do you ask? During our interview, Mr. Williams seemed more focused on the potential insurance settlement than on your well-being. He asked multiple questions about how much money you might receive from the driver's insurance company. My stomach dropped. Even with the police investigating an accident that could have killed me, Robert's primary concern had been financial. He also seemed quite agitated when we told him that any settlement would go directly to you, not to him as your spouse. After Detective Martinez left, I found myself looking at my marriage with new eyes. It wasn't just the inheritance situation that had revealed Robert's true priorities, it was everything. The way he'd reacted to my previous medical bills, his increasing resentment over our financial situation, his readiness to abandon our marriage when he thought I was a burden. Dr. Peterson came by for her final evaluation. "Good news," she said with a smile. "You're cleared to go home tomorrow. Your concussion symptoms have resolved, and your ribs are healing well." "Thank you for everything," I said. "Jessica, can I speak with you privately for a moment?" I nodded, wondering what she wanted to discuss. "I've been a doctor for over 20 years, she said quietly. "I've seen a lot of family dynamics in crisis situations. Your husband's behavior, it's concerning." "How so?" "The first day you were here, before you woke up, he asked me about your prognosis. But he didn't ask if you would recover or how long it might take. He asked if your injuries would result in permanent disability or long-term care needs." I felt cold despite the warm hospital room. When I assured him that you would make a full recovery, he seemed disappointed isn't the right word, but he didn't seem relieved either. Dr. Peterson's words confirmed what I was already beginning to understand. Robert hadn't just been cruel in a moment of stress, he had been calculating. He had been considering his options based on different scenarios of my recovery. "I want you to know," Dr. Peterson continued, "that we have resources available if you need help or support. Social workers, counselors, legal advocates. You don't have to face difficult situations alone." That afternoon, Robert arrived with a suitcase full of clothes for me to wear home. "I thought you might want to look nice when you leave here," he said, trying to recapture some of his earlier attentiveness. But his gesture felt hollow now. I could see through the performance to the calculation underneath. "Robert, I need you to be honest with me about something." "Of course. Anything." If there had been no inheritance, if we were still facing the same financial problems we had before, would you still want to be married to me? He hesitated just long enough to give me my answer. "That's not a fair question," he said finally. "The inheritance is part of our reality now. But what if it wasn't?" "Jessica, why are we talking about hypotheticals? We have a chance for a real fresh start here." His refusal to answer directly was answer enough. Without the money, Robert would have continued down the path he'd been on, increasing resentment, more drinking, more anger, until he finally found a way out of what he saw as a failing marriage. As I prepared to leave the hospital the next morning, I realized that my great-aunt had given me the most precious gift imaginable, the freedom to choose. Not just financially, but emotionally and spiritually. I could choose to stay in a marriage where I was valued only for what I could provide, or I could choose to honor myself, to demand the kind of love and respect that shouldn't require an inheritance to inspire. The choice was mine, and for the first time in years, I felt strong enough to make it. Leaving the hospital felt surreal. Robert drove carefully, making small talk about the weather and asking repeatedly if I was comfortable. His solicitous behavior might have fooled someone who hadn't seen him just days earlier, but I could see the performance for what it was. Our house on Elm Street looked different somehow, smaller, shabbier, less like home and more like a place I had simply been existing. Robert immediately started talking about all the improvements we could make with our inheritance money, but I found myself thinking instead about the larger implications of my situation. That afternoon, I called Mr. Harrison to schedule a meeting. When I told Robert about the appointment, his reaction was immediate and intense. "Why? What's there to discuss? You're not seriously considering leaving me. I'm considering my options, I replied calmly. That's what responsible people do when their circumstances change. Your circumstances? Our circumstances, Jessica. We're married. We're supposed to be a team. It was interesting how the concept of teamwork only seemed important to Robert when it involved money that would benefit him. The next few days were tense. Robert alternated between sweet manipulation and barely controlled anger. He brought me flowers, cooked my favorite meals, and suggested romantic activities we hadn't done in years. But underneath the gestures, I could feel his desperation and growing resentment. On Wednesday, Caroline came over for what we told Robert was just a friendly visit, but was actually a planning session. I've been doing some research, she said quietly while Robert was in the garage, about your legal rights and options. The inheritance trust is actually quite brilliant from a legal standpoint. She had brought printouts from various legal websites and women's support organizations. The fact that your great-aunt structured it this way suggests she knew exactly what kind of situation you were in, Caroline continued. This gives you the financial independence to make choices based on what's best for you, not what you can afford. But is it wrong? I asked, using money to leave a marriage? Jessica, you're not using money to leave. You're using money to have the freedom to choose. There's a big difference. That evening, Robert tried a new approach. Instead of alternating between sweet and angry, he went for vulnerable and honest. I know I've made mistakes, he said as we sat in our small living room. I know I haven't been the husband you deserved. But people can change. I can change. What would you change specifically? I'd stop drinking. I'd go to counseling. I'd be more supportive and less critical. And if there was no inheritance, would you still want to make those changes? Again, he hesitated just long enough to reveal his true motivations. The inheritance doesn't matter, he said finally. What matters is us. But his words felt rehearsed, like he'd been practicing in front of a mirror. On Thursday, I met with Mr. Harrison at his downtown office. The building was impressive, all glass and steel reaching into the cloudy Chicago sky. His office, on the 32nd floor, had a view of Lake Michigan that took my breath away. "How are you feeling, Mrs. Williams?" he asked as his secretary brought us coffee. "Overwhelmed, but clearer than I've been in a long time." That's common in situations like this. Sudden wealth can be a catalyst that reveals truths about our relationships that we might have been avoiding. Mr. Harrison spread several documents across his large mahogany desk. "I want to make sure you understand all of your options. The monthly allowance of $5,000 is yours regardless of what you decide about your marriage. That money cannot be touched by your husband or considered marital property. And if I choose to separate, then you would have full access to the entire estate, the house in Lake Forest, the investment portfolio, and all liquid assets." He pulled out photographs of the Lake Forest property. It was beautiful, a large colonial-style home with mature trees, a circular driveway, and what looked like extensive gardens. Your great-aunt lived there for 43 years. She maintained it beautifully, and it's completely paid for. There are also several rental properties that generate monthly income. I stared at the photographs, trying to imagine myself living in such a place. It seemed almost too good to be true. "There's something else," Mr. Harrison continued. "Your great-aunt left detailed records of her observations about your marriage. She was quite thorough in documenting her concerns." He handed me a thick folder. "These are copies of reports from the private investigator she hired. I think you should read them, but perhaps not here. Take them home and review them when you're ready." The weight of the folder in my hands felt significant. Whatever was inside would likely confirm what I was already beginning to understand about Robert, but seeing it in black and white might still be shocking. "One more thing," Mr. Harrison said as I prepared to leave. "Your great-aunt also established a separate fund for legal expenses, should you need divorce representation. She wanted to ensure that you wouldn't have to use your inheritance money for legal fees. Even from beyond the grave, Margaret Thompson was protecting me, anticipating needs I hadn't even thought of yet. That evening, after Robert had gone to bed, I sat in our small kitchen and opened the investigator's folder. What I found inside made my hands shake. There were photographs of Robert at various bars around the city, often with the same woman, a blonde I didn't recognize. The dates went back 6 months. There were credit card records showing charges at restaurants and hotels that I'd never been to. Phone records indicating lengthy calls to numbers I didn't recognize. But the most devastating discovery was a recording transcript from just 2 weeks before my accident. The investigator had somehow captured a conversation between Robert and his friend Mike, where Robert talked openly about his marriage. "Robert, I'm telling you, man, I'm done with this. She's dragging me down financially, emotionally, everything." "Mike, so why don't you just leave?" "Robert, because I can't afford to. The house is in both our names, and I don't have anywhere else to go. Plus, if we divorce, I'll have to pay alimony based on her health issues." "Mike, that sucks." "Robert, I keep hoping something will happen. Like she'll decide to leave on her own, or I don't know. Sometimes I think it would be easier if she just wasn't around anymore." I sat in the dark kitchen, reading and rereading those last words. It would be easier if she just wasn't around anymore. This wasn't just about money or marital dissatisfaction. Robert had been wishing for my absence, possibly permanently, weeks before the accident. The next morning, Robert seemed to sense that something had shifted. I was polite but distant, going through the motions of our morning routine while processing the information I had discovered. "You seem quiet today," he observed over breakfast. "I'm still recovering," I replied simply. "Maybe we should plan something nice for this weekend. Maybe drive up to Wisconsin, see the fall colors." The suggestion of a romantic getaway might have been appealing once, but now it felt like another manipulation tactic. "I think I need some time to rest and think." Robert's expression darkened slightly. "Think about what?" "About everything. The accident, the inheritance, our marriage, what I want for the future." "What you want? What about what we want?" There it was again, the assumption that my desires should automatically align with his needs. That afternoon, Caroline came over ostensibly to help with some light housework, but really to check on me and hear about my meeting with Mr. Harrison. "You look different," she observed as we folded laundry in the living room. "How so?" "Stronger. More resolved, I guess." I told her about the investigator's report, watching her expression grow more concerned with each detail. "Jessica, this is serious. The photos, the financial records, but especially that conversation. He's been living a double life while making you feel guilty about medical expenses and your part-time work." "I know. And the comment about wishing I wasn't around anymore. That's beyond cruel. That's actually frightening." We were interrupted by Robert's return from work. He seemed surprised to find Caroline there again. "Another visit," he said, his tone making it clear he wasn't pleased. "Caroline was helping me with some things I can't do yet because of my ribs," I explained. "I can help you with whatever you need," Robert replied, his eyes moving suspiciously between us. After Caroline left, Robert confronted me more directly. "I don't like her coming around so much. She's always had it out for me, and now she's probably filling your head with ideas about leaving me for money. Caroline cares about my well-being. I care about your well-being too. I'm your husband. That should count for something." "It should," I agreed. "But caring about someone means wanting what's best for them, not just what benefits you." Robert's face flushed red. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means that if you truly cared about my well-being, you would have been concerned about my recovery from the accident, not immediately calculating hospital bills and insurance settlements. Someone has to be practical, and someone has to be loving and supportive. In a good marriage, one person can be both." That night, Robert tried once more to be romantic, suggesting we go to bed early and reconnect. But physical intimacy felt impossible when I knew about his affair and his wish for me to disappear from his life. "I'm still sore from the accident," I said, which was partially true. "It's been over a week," he replied with barely concealed frustration. "Broken ribs take time to heal. Everything takes time with you lately." The comment stung because it revealed his growing impatience with my recovery process, the same process he should have been supporting unconditionally. Over the weekend, I spent time walking around our neighborhood, thinking about my future. The October air was crisp, and the trees were showing their full autumn colors. Everything in nature was changing, transforming, preparing for a new season. I found myself stopping at Mrs. Patterson's house. She was in her front yard, raking leaves, and waved me over. "How are you feeling, dear?" she asked with genuine warmth. "Better every day. Mrs. Patterson, can I ask you something about my great-aunt?" "Of course." "What was she like? As a person, I mean." Mrs. Patterson leaned on her rake and smiled. "Margaret was one of the strongest women I ever knew. She married young to a man who turned out to be quite controlling and emotionally abusive. It took her years to find the courage to leave him, but when she did, she built an amazing life for herself. She was divorced. Oh, yes, and much happier for it. She often said that the best decision she ever made was choosing herself over a marriage that was slowly destroying her spirit." Mrs. Patterson's words resonated deeply. My great-aunt hadn't just left me money, she had left me her story, her example, her permission to choose courage over comfort. "She talked about you, you know," Mrs. Patterson continued. "She was worried that you were repeating her early mistakes. That's why she set up the inheritance the way she did." That evening I made my decision. I called Mr. Harrison and scheduled another meeting for Monday morning. When I told Robert about the appointment, his reaction was explosive. "You're really going to do this, aren't you?" he shouted. "You're going to throw away 8 years of marriage for money." "I'm not throwing anything away, Robert. I'm choosing not to accept less than I deserve." "What you deserve. I've supported you, taken care of you. You've resented me. You've blamed me for our problems while living a secret life. You wished I would disappear from your life." "That's not true." But his denial lacked conviction, and we both knew it. "I found the investigator's report, Robert. I know about the affair. I know about the conversations with Mike. I know that you've been planning your exit from this marriage while making me feel guilty for existing." Robert's face went white, then red, then white again. "You had me investigated?" "My great-aunt had you investigated. She wanted to protect me from exactly this situation. This is insane. You can't end a marriage based on some private investigator's report. I'm not ending it based on the report. I'm ending it based on your behavior, your words, your actions. The report just confirmed what I was already feeling." Robert tried several more approaches over the next 2 days: tears, promises, threats, guilt trips, but my resolve only strengthened. Each manipulation attempt reminded me why I needed to leave. Monday morning, I met with Mr. Harrison again, this time with Caroline for moral support. "I want to proceed with the separation," I told him. "I want to access my inheritance and start building a new life." "Are you certain? This decision will be difficult to reverse." "I'm certain." Mr. Harrison began pulling out paperwork. "We'll need to file separation papers first. I can recommend an excellent divorce attorney who specializes in complex financial situations." As we went through the legal process, I felt a mixture of sadness and relief. Sadness for the dreams that hadn't worked out, for the love that had never been what I thought it was, but also relief profound, overwhelming relief at the prospect of freedom. "There's one more thing your great-aunt wanted me to give you," Mr. Harrison said, reaching into his desk drawer. "She recorded a video message for you to watch if you chose to leave your marriage." He handed me a tablet, and I pressed play with trembling fingers. A distinguished-looking woman appeared on the screen, clearly family, with my mother's eyes and chin. "Hello, Jessica," she said with a warm smile. "If you're watching this, it means you've found the courage to choose yourself. I'm so proud of you." Tears started flowing before I could stop them. "I know this is scary. I know it feels overwhelming. But I want you to know that you're not alone. You have resources, you have options, and most importantly, you have value that has nothing to do with marriage or money." She paused, her eyes kind and understanding. "I stayed too long in a marriage that was destroying me. I don't want that for you. You deserve love that lifts you up, not tears you down. You deserve partnership, not manipulation. You deserve happiness." The video ended with her wishing me well and reminding me that courage is not the absence of fear, but action in spite of fear. That afternoon, I went home to pack. Robert wasn't there. He was probably at work or maybe with his girlfriend. I took only my personal belongings and a few items with sentimental value. As I was loading my car, Mrs. Patterson came over. "Starting a new adventure?" she asked. "Something like that." "Good for you, dear. Your great-aunt would be so proud." I drove to Caroline's apartment, where I would stay until I could get settled in the Lake Forest house. As I pulled away from Elm Street, I felt like I was driving out of one life and into another. 3 months later, I was settled in the beautiful colonial house that was now mine. The rooms were filled with sunlight, the gardens were peaceful, and I had started volunteering at a women's shelter, using my experience to help other women find their own courage. Robert had contested the divorce initially, trying to claim rights to the inheritance, but my great-aunt's legal protections held firm. Eventually, he accepted a modest settlement and moved in with his girlfriend. I received word through my lawyer that he had been telling people I left him for money, that I was greedy and heartless. But I knew the truth, and more importantly, so did the people who mattered to me. Caroline visited often, marveling at how different I seemed. "You're like yourself again," she said one sunny afternoon as we had tea in the garden. "Actually, you're like a version of yourself I've never seen before. Confident, peaceful, strong. I feel like I finally woke up from a long, bad dream. Any regrets?" I thought about it carefully. I regret that it took an inheritance to give me the courage I should have had all along. But I don't regret choosing myself. I don't regret demanding better. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I received an unexpected call. It was Detective Martinez, the officer who had investigated my accident. "Mrs. Williams, I wanted to give you an update on your case. The driver who hit you has been sentenced to 2 years in prison and will pay significant damages. Thank you for letting me know. There's something else. During our investigation, we discovered some troubling information about your ex-husband that I think you should know." My stomach clenched. "What kind of information?" "We found evidence that he had taken out a significant life insurance policy on you just 3 months before your accident. He also made some concerning internet searches about accident scenarios and insurance payouts." The blood drained from my face. "Are you suggesting—" "We can't prove anything concrete, but the pattern of behavior was suspicious enough that we felt you should be aware. You made the right decision in leaving that situation." After I hung up, I sat in my beautiful garden, surrounded by my great-aunt's flowers, and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. Robert hadn't just wished I would disappear, he had been planning for it. That evening, I called Mr. Harrison to discuss additional security measures and legal protections. Then I called Caroline to tell her about the detective's call. "Jessica," she said quietly, "you didn't just leave an unhappy marriage. You escaped something much more dangerous." As I went to bed that night in my safe, beautiful home, I thought about the chain of events that had brought me to this point. A terrible accident had revealed terrible truths, but it had also led to unexpected gifts: freedom, security, and most importantly, the knowledge that I was strong enough to choose myself. My great-aunt had given me more than money. She had given me a second chance at life, literally it seemed. and I was determined to make the most of it. The next morning, I woke up to sunshine streaming through windows that were mine, in a house that was mine, with a future that was entirely my own to create. For the first time in years, I felt truly alive. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to walk away from someone who wishes you weren't there. Sometimes inheritance isn't just about money, it's about inheriting the wisdom, courage, and self-respect of someone who fought the same battles you're fighting. And sometimes the person who shouts, "I hope you never recover," is really saying, "I hope you never become strong enough to see who I really am." But I had recovered. I had seen, and I had chosen freedom.